So if you have just joined us, we're going to start in just a few minutes, 4 more minutes, and you can download the slides that Hilarie is mentioning by clicking the Hilarie Cash PhD in the blue bar above where she's presenting, and you can follow along or download them and save them for later. But I'm following along because I want to see them. So this will be recorded, and the slides will be available on In the Room's platform, as all the others have been. These have been a great resource. I've shared them with so many people because I've had the pleasure of working with everyone. So I go, oh, you need to know about this one. Oh, you need check this one out. I think it'll be helpful. So they've been really useful.
That's great.
But I appreciate you you joining us today because
sure. It's important for people to be educated.
Yeah, well, and so Dr. Rob has been doing the sex, love, and addiction on Friday nights for like 4 years on In the Room. So In the Room's platform has been around for like 11 years, and during COVID, I mean, they were way ahead of COVID, and then COVID hit, and their numbers have blossomed because it's been such a great resource, and there's so many valuable meetings. Grief, trauma, 12-step, any form of it, and connection points. But Rob was thinking, I know all these professionals that normally just speak to other professionals, and how cool would it be if we came on and spoke to the recovery community directly? And I agree. I think the resources, it's stuff that, unless you go to a therapist that happened to hear that person and, has incorporated it, you may or may not hear about it. And, just having the ability to think about, things in a little different lens, can be very valuable.
Right.
If we're all really striving for improving our lives and our recovery, any tools that we learn are a good thing. So,
yeah.
So those of you joining us, we're going to start in about 2 more minutes. This will be recorded. So if you go to the people requesting to share, I'm going to hit X. And I apologize. Apparently my messaging didn't work for the last time. But it appears to be okay now, I hope. If somebody wants to send me a text or a message and test it, that'd be fine. So Hilarie's going to present on the slides that are in the blue bar above her head, and you can download those and follow along. And she will answer questions, as well. So, and we're going to get started in 1 more minute. So,
and Tammy, I am perfectly happy to answer questions as we go. I mean, I don't mind at all if instead of holding on to the last 20 minutes, we just answer.
That's totally fine, and I will do that. I toggle off my audio because invariably I get phone calls or the dog barks or something. So I will toggle back on and do that. So I'm happy to do that. So
okay, thank you. You can curate the questions, as they say.
Yes. Can you send me a text to try? Okay. So it is time. We're going to get started. So I've known Hilarie for a long time. She took the CSAT, Certified Sex Addiction Therapist training, a number of years ago, and I knew that her focus has always been in the gaming and internet arena, but it's so co-occurring with so much. And the guys that come to the Seeking Integrity Los Angeles treatment program, when I start asking, how about gaming? Oh yeah. And so so to pretend that it's just, neutral, it may not serve us well, but I guess we're going to learn more. So I'm going to toggle off again for those of you joining. Please message me any questions that you have for Hilarie. We'll ask them along the way, and follow along. Her slides are under the Hilarie Cash PhD link. You can download those and follow along. So we'll get started. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to go back to the first slide because that just gives my name and my contact information. And I would like the audience to know that I maintain a listserv for people who are really interested in internet and video game addiction. People send me articles and things like that cartoon, and I then just disseminate it to to the people on my listserv. So for those of you who might be interested, please just contact me. My email, my best email is thehilary.cash@restartlife.com. Okay, so I love this cartoon. I think it's hilarious, but I also love it because it's really about missed connection. And I think that so much of the problem with internet and video game addiction is that people think often that they are connecting well when they're playing video games together. They're in their gamer communities or whatever they're doing online. But the reality is that, and research absolutely confirms this, that the more time people spend online, it is very closely correlated with increasing depression and anxiety. So that's just the reality. And so people think they're connecting often, but it is not the connection that truly satisfies. I would say that, well, I will just mention that there is a concept that I think is very important. It's called limbic resonance. And a wonderful book called A General Theory of Love introduces the concept of limbic resonance, and it has to do with what happens when two people are together that care about each other, they feel safe with each other, and when they are in one another's physical presence, it releases a whole bouquet of neurochemicals that keeps each person well regulated, both emotionally and physiologically. And we really suffer if we do not have enough of this. And all addictions in the end tend to be very isolating. And this is also true of internet addiction and video game addiction. So the analogy I use is that if a person is starving and you give that person just sugar, it might fill their belly and satisfy their appetite in the moment, but they are still going to starve. And that, I think, is what happens with the internet very often. Okay, so what are we talking about? The statistics vary widely. I mean, everyone is using the internet. Certainly in this country, it's rare to find somebody who isn't able to get on the internet either with their smartphone or with other computers. So everybody's using it. In terms of video game play, also, almost the vast majority of Americans do play some form of video game. It might be very casual games that are played on the phone. Things like Candy Crush, which is very popular and well known to most people, all the way up to very sophisticated, complex strategy games and fighting games. So there are many different types of games. They are all being carefully designed to hold our attention and keep us in the game. And that doesn't matter if it's just a short casual game and you just do it for, 15 minutes and then you're off to something else. That's not going to be a problem. But if you are caught in a game that lasts and goes on and on and on, or you're caught up in even a short game, but you really feel compelled to return to it again and again, this is what can lead to an addiction. In terms of statistics on video game addiction, the statistics vary widely because the research is not being done with one agreed upon standard set of questions and criteria for gaming addiction. But probably roughly in the general population, we're probably talking about 10% of gamers probably meet criteria for addiction. It may be more, it may be less, but the part of it is young adults who seem to have the greatest problem. And the research is showing anywhere from 13 to 19% of young adults are meeting criteria for addiction. So why are these things so very addictive? Not just video games, but social media. And I do recommend to everyone that you watch a movie, if you have not seen it already, called The Social Dilemma, because it does explain well the kind of the tricks that are being employed to help those who stand to make money from various platforms, gaming platforms, social media platforms, and so forth. These things are very, very sophisticated in their design, and it is designed to hook people and essentially designed to be addictive, because that's how they make their money, is having people stay on the site so they can be, it's a number of things. They can be bombarded with advertising, so that makes money for the advertisers and the people who are being paid by the advertisers, and by the people who are, many games now have in-game gambling elements that also, so people are spending their money in games. The game companies are making enormous amounts of money with all of these what are called microtransactions inside the games, and those elements are actually very, very similar to gambling. Some countries do actually categorize them as gambling, and the way it works is that, to give you just an example of that, if I'm playing a popular game, World of Warcraft was popular when we first opened up Restart. That is no longer like the main game, but League of Legends is very popular. And Counter-Strike has always been popular, but these are games that you can go into these games and come across an element that you can purchase the chance to open it and see what you get, right? In Fortnite, I think it's Fortnite, where they have llamas, and they're piñata llamas, and you purchase the ability to open, whack open this piñata, and then you see what you get. And of course, most of the time you don't get something that is worth very much, but sometimes you get something you really want. Either its value is that it's just cool, or its value is that it helps you in the game, or its value is that you can take it outside the game to some other website and sell it or trade it, and so forth. So there are just many different ways in which all of these platforms are carefully designed so that you will get hooked on them. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about high dopamine activities and low dopamine activities. So, but first, I just want to mention, that there are many, many, many things that people can do when they go online. They can play games, they can gamble, they can look at porn, and I've only mentioned porn here, but of course there are plenty of other sites of a sexual nature that also are available online. Social media, anime and manga. This is animation. It's referred to as anime, and it usually has, it originated, the aesthetic style of these kinds of cartoons originated in Japan, and so there's a whole style to that. And what I have found with the gamers that we work with is that they also adore anime and manga and spend a great deal of time with it. Anime is the animation, but it also refers to just the, paintings and drawings that can be turned into animation, or that can be used in manga. And manga are basically comic strips or comic novels, graphic novels. So that can be found online and is very popular with the gamers, and other folks as well. But I work with gamers primarily, so I'm very familiar with it, the overlap of those who are into that and the gaming communities. Of course, random surfing is something that probably all of us engage in to some extent. And if you think about it, the principle at work in gambling and gaming and going online is that when you go to a site, you don't know if you're hoping you'll be pleased. You anticipate being pleased by the site you go to, but you may not be pleased by it. And so you then click to go somewhere else, and you might be pleased by that site, but you might not be pleased by it. You might read a story and follow the link and then be disappointed with where the link takes you, and then you click on another link. And that is called the unpredictability of feeling rewarded. And that is something which is at work with most of the things that we do online. It's not completely predictable. And as long as it's not too disappointing and we just lose interest, it keeps us. That is the very baseline of kind of what hooks us. There are other layers of things that keep us hooked, but that is the baseline of it. Of course, we can watch TV, movies, music, and I find with the folks that we work with at Restart that there's also a heavy overlap with a lot of antisocial content on various sites like Reddit and 4chan. And some people also find a way to and are curious about and get involved in either just looking around on the dark web or actually getting involved in dark web illegal kind of activities. So all of which can be addictive. We actually right now, we run an adolescent program and an adult program. And right now, we have an adolescent in our program who says, I was addicted to the dark web. And so all of these things have the potential to be addictive, and they are designed to be that way. All right. So what is the role of dopamine? I would like the audience to understand that, and you probably already do. You probably have heard about dopamine. It is a neurochemical that is associated with addiction. It is associated with anticipation and seeking behavior. I've got something in my eye, excuse me. And dopamine can, when we are living our lives just normally, most of life is made up of low dopamine activities. So I get together with a friend and I have a meaningful, pleasant conversation. There is dopamine being released into my brain, but not high levels of dopamine. It's low levels of dopamine, but those low levels of dopamine still make me feel good. I'm happy to be doing what I'm doing, and I'm feeling that happiness or joy or contentment. The things that we get addicted to are the things that produce high levels of dopamine, and so we can just refer to them as high dopamine activities. And so these are things that release high levels of dopamine into the brain, into what's called the pleasure pathway of the brain. And because it's too much, the brain has to downregulate because it doesn't want to be operating when you're high. And instead, it wants to be operating normally. So it has to downregulate itself in order to operate normally. It's what we call tolerance. And then there's this period called withdrawal, when the brain is upregulating to normal function again. So dopamine release can be faster or slower. When it's faster, we're more likely to get addicted. And when it's stronger, we're more likely to get addicted. And this goes for all addictions, whether they're chemical addictions or behavioral addictions. So when the receptors have when the brain has downregulated and withdrawn the receptors to pick up dopamine and other neurochemicals that are involved in this, we call it the reward deficiency syndrome. And that leads to tolerance and then the experience of withdrawal when you're cut off from that thing to which you are addicted. So that it's not that when you're living a life in recovery, you are living a life which involves mostly the low dopamine activities. Think about a game of chess. That's a low dopamine activity. It's fun. You can have great enjoyment. Think about going to the park with your kid and running around and playing some game in the park. It's actually a low dopamine activity. You're having fun, so the levels of dopamine are somewhat elevated, but it's still a low dopamine activity. But, if you're consuming a heavy dose of pornography, you're very engaged in a video game, and so forth. Those are going to be the higher dopamine activities. And it's fine. There's not a problem with high dopamine activities in moderation. We are designed to really enjoy those things. So when you're, having a sexual experience, that's a high dopamine activity. Well, we're designed to have sex. We're supposed to be really enjoying it. And so high dopamine activities are fine. It's just when we do them in excess that the problems come to us. So who is vulnerable to fall into addiction to video games or, other aspects of the internet? And always, the younger a person is, the more vulnerable they are. And that's because the brain wires together, the brain develops according to what we do with it. So if you are a child and you are being handed video games and you're very young, your brain is getting wired for video games and not getting wired for all the other things that children's brains actually are supposed to be getting wired for. And so what we see at Restart with the people who come to us is that they have developmentally fallen behind their healthier peers. They didn't develop the social skills that their peers would have developed, for instance. And so that wiring really happens. The younger a person is, the longer that wiring will go on, and the more it's going to have a detrimental effect on development. Those in recovery from other addictions, very vulnerable to transfer from a chemical addiction, let's say, or a sex addiction, any other addiction. It's really easy to transfer to an internet or video game addiction because it's right there. We're carrying our phones around with us in our pockets. It is socially acceptable to be playing, let's say, a video game. It is affordable. Many video games are free. So it's just absolutely accessible all the time. We're carrying it around in our pockets. So how easy it is if you're in recovery, you have a pleasure pathway well well developed in your brain for addiction, that until for a long time to come, that pleasure pathway is there, and it's craving stimulation. It's craving stimulation. And so, we all have smartphones now. So, hey, it is so easy to just discover that this smartphone, be it social media, video games, or anything else, is, hey, it's stimulating that neural pathway in my brain that is craving stimulation. But now I'm doing it in this way that's, has all those characteristics I just named: affordable, accessible, acceptable. So it's very easy to transfer to this kind of addiction when you're in recovery from something else. So beware, be really aware that that is a possibility. People with underlying mental health problems are going to be vulnerable. Again, as we know, all addictions can serve to numb, can serve to distract, can serve to help us not feel pain, the pain of depression, the pain of anxiety, the discomfort of heavy, intolerable stress and distress. And so it is, again, like video games are an incredible distraction, and they have all of those advantages I was just naming. So people with underlying mental health problems can certainly be vulnerable to this. And again, people who are bored, lonely, anxious, suffering inside a family where the relationships are negative and painful, feeling self-loathing, not feeling successful, marginalized, shut in. All of these are things that make somebody vulnerable because it's so very easy and accessible, and goes unrecognized as something which also has a dangerous underside to it. All right, so of all of the things we can do on the internet, there's only one which has been now formally recognized as a disorder, and that is gaming disorder. The International Code of Diseases, put out by the World Health Organization, is their next volume. The ICD-11 has gaming disorder, and here's how it defines it: a pattern of gaming that involves impaired control, like all addiction, impaired control, increasing priority given to gaming over other activities and interests, again, like all addiction, and continuation or escalation despite the negative consequences, again, like all addictions. So gaming disorder has those same characteristics, and it has to be severe enough to cause significant impairment. And they decided that it had to be evident for at least 12 months. It can be actually, it can develop very quickly. Within a month, you could see somebody truly addicted to video games, but they're not going to be able to receive the diagnosis until 12 months have passed. All right. Now, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, DSM-5, has proposed internet gaming disorder. It's listed at the back. It is not given full-fledged recognition yet, but there are people working they're on a task force pulling together the evidence to say, look, in your next iteration of the DSM, please have a look at all this evidence. I think you will be convinced that indeed we can call it a disorder in its own right and give it full-fledged status. These are the criteria that have been proposed and are more or less fine. The people on this task force are looking at all of these and deciding if they are the best criteria to use. And so we'll see what they come up with in the end. But I'm sure they'll probably drop off the internet and just go to gaming disorder, because the reality is somebody can become addicted to video games that are not played online, that are just played with a console without being also on the internet. And again, like all addiction, it progresses. So, and I'm talking right now just about gaming addiction, but this applies to other aspects of the internet. But with gaming addiction, of course, there are some people who don't play video games at all. There are the recreational casual players. There are recreational serious players. Those serious players are going to be devoting more time than the casual players. They'll be playing games that require more time in all likelihood. And then there are the hardcore hazardous gamers. And these are gamers who are starting to show some of the signs of addiction, but they don't yet meet criteria, but they're headed in that direction. And then the hardcore disordered gamers, those are the ones who do fully meet criteria. And we also know that addiction itself goes from, it exists along a continuum from mild to severe. So hardcore disordered gamers, initially are going to be on the milder side of that spectrum, but as time goes by and their addiction worsens, they are going to become more and more severe. And, severe cases, I'll give you just one of many examples. When we first opened Restart, and I didn't even say what Restart is, but I'll just tell you now that Restart is a residential treatment program. We have a program for adults and we have a program for adolescents. And we also have a transition program for the adults. So we opened 12 years ago, and we got a call just after we had opened from a stepmother who told us about her stepson. He didn't live with them. He lived with his grandmother, but he had just had his leg amputated because he had spent so much time seated in a certain position that cut off blood to his leg. And gaming, we know, actually has an analgesic effect. People who are caught up in gaming and absolutely immersed in it don't pay attention to their bodies. They're so immersed in the game, they lose track of their bodies. And so he just lost track of what his body was telling him, which is that, your leg has gone to sleep and you need to move. And he didn't. And anyway, he lost his leg. So that's just an example. And in general, I think it's really important to understand that this mesmerizing effect of video games, and it applies to gambling and video games and pornography as well. But again, I'm right here talking about gaming because these video games are also designed for children and are being given to children. And they're so mesmerizing that they override the body's needs and demands. So we need sleep, but gamers don't get enough sleep. They come in to us very sleep deprived. Anybody needs food, but gamers often are not eating. So again, the gaming, mesmerizing effect of the gaming overrides the body's requirement for food, for sleep, for exercise. And this can start when children are very, very young, because, again, it's mesmerizing. So again, getting back to that influence of that on development, which can be actually very harmful. All right. So it is, however, so for those of you who are tuned into this and are trying to think about it, it is not easy to discern when a passion for screen time becomes addictive. It's not an easy thing to discern. It's why we have criteria, and so you have to think about those criteria. But because it falls from milder to more severe, it's and there's this hazardous moment. When does it cross the line into addiction? It's just not that easy to know. But if you or someone you care about is showing any of the signs of addiction, even if it's just one, that's indicating that there is a problem, because all of those signs are problem areas. And so it's really important to take corrective action as soon as some of those symptoms appear. Well, so I'm going to go through these problems. And let's see, I have to keep track of time. Tammy, have no questions come in from the audience yet?
I have not seen any questions. So you're doing great. Just keep going. So we'll just keep going, and I'll toggle in and interrupt you if we get some questions. Okay.
All right. So I'm not going to stop in 6 minutes for questions. I'm just going to keep going. All right. And then please, audience, ask questions as I go. So what are the problems associated with excessive screen time? I've already talked about gaming disorder, and now I want to talk about the social problems that can develop. At Restart, most of the people who come are gamers. They're not addicted specifically to social media, although they may use social media. They also use pornography, but their addiction and where they have really devoted their time and where they've actually developed their identities is through gaming. And they all have social problems. Most of them show a lot of social anxiety. They have been isolated in front of their screens, often for years, really avoiding the world. And that isolation in front of the screen leads to social anxiety and social skill deficits, which of course contributes to the social anxiety. They often come in with a lot of conflict if it's a person with a partner. Our clients, for the most part, don't have partners, but if somebody has a partner, they're likely to be in conflict with that partner because of the time they're devoting to whatever they're doing online. And conflict, a child with parents who are trying to control the child's use and so forth. It's really typical that if a kid who has been developing pretty normally through, let's say, through elementary school, but they get to 5th or 6th or 7th grade, and now they're starting to really spend every moment they can playing video games, their friends are no longer very important to them. And so they lose their friends, and they turn instead to developing friendships online with other gamers. And this is very typical. And then what I would call unhealthy sexuality or intimacy disorder. I think every person who comes to Restart, I would say, has an intimacy disorder. They really don't know how to initiate, develop, and maintain healthy, intimate relationships, sexual or non-sexual. They all have grown up with pornography since they were young. Many of them began looking at porn when they were still in elementary school. Not all of them, but a very high number of them. And I don't know if people in the audience are familiar with a misogynistic area of the internet, which is called the manosphere. And so a certain number of our gamers are actually quite enthralled with the manosphere. And that refers to sites on the internet where men talk to each other and post, to each other, and they are really very hostile toward women. Inceldom refers to involuntary celibates. These are people who believe that females should give them sex, but they're not interested in relationships, but they really want to have sex with women, and they're very angry at women for not giving it to them. MGOW stands for men going their own way. And, if you went to that website, you would just read about their antipathy toward women, very misogynistic, and they really basically say, we don't want to ever have relationships. Many of them will say, pornography is fine with me and nothing else. I want nothing to do with women. I'd prefer not to even work for women. It's very, very misogynistic. The Red Pill Society is another example. So all of that is called the manosphere. And I think that really comes out of this unhealthy development of intimacy disorder and being steeped through video games and pornography in misogynistic content. And if you're a kid and you're growing up with that, well, what kind of ideas are you going to have after all? Okay, so the folks who come to us, be they adolescent or adult, are also showing up with some serious health problems, physical health problems. For many, they are underweight or overweight. Their eating habits have been very, very poor. They've been consuming vast quantities of soda, caffeinated drinks, eating fast food. So really malnourished when it comes down to it, and very deconditioned because they've been very sedentary. Very sleep deprived, often with very poor posture because they've been sitting in front of their screens since they were young, very, very young sometimes, and they just have not developed musculature and so forth to hold themselves upright. Vitamin deficiencies, particularly vitamin D. And there is a growing amount of research that's showing that the electromagnetic field that we are all being exposed to through our phones, through Wi-Fi, is having a deleterious effect on sperm production, carcinogenic changes in the brain, and so forth. So it's recommended, for instance, that children not be given smartphones, which have high levels of EMFs, until they're much older, because again, the younger a child is, the more that radiation penetrates the skull and has negative effect on brain development. So it's very controversial. I've met many people who really take offense to this idea, but if anybody would like to learn more about it, contact me and I will send you to, I can give you a link to conferences where the scientists are coming together and talking about the problems of electromagnetic field exposure. We see comorbid mental health conditions. I've already mentioned depression and the fact that the more time you spend online, the more depressed you're bound to become. Anxiety goes along with that because depression and anxiety go together anyway. But as I've already talked about, these social skill deficits lead to high social anxiety. ADHD is a common co-occurring mental health problem. And I'm always a little skeptical when somebody arrives about whether or not they truly have ADHD or ADD, because if you have from a very early age been playing video games, your brain has been getting wired usually for a pretty short attention span. And then as you get older and addicted to it, and you're sleep deprived and nutritionally deprived, you know, I think you're going to end up looking like you have ADD or ADHD. And so we're always interested, and we kind of do ongoing assessment with our clients to see if we think that that truly is the correct diagnosis. Autism spectrum disorder, is called ASD, is about a third of our clients have traits. It's not severe, but they have traits. And sometimes it's been diagnosed, sometimes it hasn't. But the reason I think they're very drawn to video games and the online world is that they're uncomfortable, and because they don't really know how to parse well social interactions. They don't know how to really read well the social cues, and have often been bullied and experienced a lot of really negative things in social interactions as children. And so they discover the internet, video games, and this is where they don't have to worry about all that stuff. And they're not being bullied. They're being admired because of their prowess in the video games, let's say. PTSD, again, it's just, something painful that can be where video games and the internet can be a wonderful distraction and have a numbing effect. We've already talked about addictions. And then there is this thing called I disorder. Larry Rosen wrote a book called I Disorder. And at Restart, we confirmed this because as clients come in, for years and years, we gave them, we still give them an assessment, and we do an initial assessment. But for many years, we also gave them, as part of that assessment, a test called the MCMI, which is very good at identifying personality disorders or personality disorder traits. And sure enough, I disorder refers to this collection of traits from different personality disorders that come together over and over again. And we found this to be true. So they might have not a full-blown avoidant personality disorder, but they are avoidant. So they have the traits of that. They have the traits of being very dependent. They have traits of being narcissistic, traits of being antisocial, traits of being borderline. None of them usually a full-blown personality disorder, but these traits congregate together. So anyway, this is something we've seen, and which came first? Personally, I think if they started young, I think it's the result of too much time spent with screens. And then academic and work problems. Almost everyone who has come, who's an adult, has failed out of college. The adolescents are their grades are either way just falling precipitously, or they're in full-blown school refusal, and the parents just don't know how to make them go to school. If they have held jobs, many of them have never worked, but if they've held jobs, they have not been successful in those jobs, so they have lost them. I'm referring to our clients, and then they often have financial problems as a result of all this. So these are the problems associated. And so what are now some of the solutions? This is a picture taken from Restart, where Gary, who is the man facing the camera, is helping a group of our clients put in a chess board, an outside chessboard. And it just captures something that I think is so valuable and needed for people who are addicted to the internet and video games and have been isolated often for years and years and years. It's the coming together, working together, being together, finding a purpose together that is not to win together in a video game, but to actually create something together out in the real world. And through that experience, gain connection and gain self-esteem as they build skill and learn new things in the world. So that's why I love this picture. But connection is also not just to people, it's also to animals. When they first come to Restart, they go to the ranch. And at the ranch, we have horses, goats, the dog, cats, chickens, and they are involved in taking care of those animals. It's a working ranch. And so, again, connection to nature, connection to animals, connection to one another. This is very much, I think all addicts understand that connection is absolutely has to be part of the solution. So let's say you are...
I have a quick question for
Yeah.
you.
Yeah.
So I see a picture of I think a female, with the animals,
Yeah.
which are adorable, by the way. But with your program, are you like, my assumption is that there's predominantly males that that are struggling with this, but I think that could be my assumption too. Just like sex addiction, it isn't all about men. Are you seeing a lot of younger females, also struggling, or is it across the board?
In 12 years of being open, we have had 10 or 11 females. So it is mostly males who are suffering from this problem. Now, we know the females who come are also gamers, and they have gotten caught up in gaming just like the men have. But we don't see that many. I think the research is very clear that women tend to, are drawn much more to social media. But somehow it seems to me that they are remaining functional. They don't become so dysfunctional in spite of an addiction to social media. They don't become so dysfunctional that they're completely failing in their lives. Whereas these young men that we work with have just, they've become truly non-functional, and which is why they need the help that they need. Yeah. So thanks for asking the question. So think in terms of 24 hours. And I love to use, a pie chart. And if the whole idea is to have balance, right? All addicts have, when they're in their addiction, they've lost balance, and they have to find balance. And that is absolutely true for internet and video game addicts as well. So we ask our clients to really think about how to fill out this pie chart. If you're going to have a balanced relationship to technology, it also means getting your priorities straight. So, how much sleep do you need? let's say on average, 8 hours. How much time needs to be devoted to school and work? Well, let's just say another 8 hours. What else do you need in your life to have a healthy, balanced life? And you start filling in the other hours. You need time for exercise. You need time to socialize face to face. You need time to shower and brush your teeth and just take and eat well, prepare good food and eat well, and so forth. As you fill all of that in, the time that's left over when you've taken care of all of the things that need and should be priorities, well, then you can decide if you truly can limit your screen use to that time that you truly do have that's free, and it does, and that wedge does not keep growing, well, then you're in good shape. That's what you're looking for. But if you are someone who can't set those priorities and keep them straight, and if you start off with everything in the right, well balanced, but you find that wedge of time devoted to screens is growing, that's a signal that there's a problem afoot. Okay, I cannot resist talking about matters related to children and child rearing, because I'm sure many in the audience have children. So I just have to talk about it a little bit. What children need, this is a pyramid created by Chris Rowan, wonderful woman. Her website is zonein.ca. I highly recommend it. Children need to move. They need to touch their world. They need to connect with people that they care about. And they need nature. Children really do need time in nature. So the problem with screens, as I have mentioned before, is that they can interfere with all of that. So when you're a parent and you're thinking about what your kids need, remember, they don't need screens, except in school. Perhaps if a school requires screens, they may need screens for school, but otherwise they don't actually need screens. What they need are these things. And if you provide them with movement and touch and connection and nature, they're going to develop optimally. And screens might have a small part in there, but if you can keep for kids their screen time, if they have free time to be on screens and you're going to allow that, I highly recommend that it be low dopamine activities on the screen, not high dopamine activities on the screen. So for instance, something creative on the screen. They can, you've got a child would like to learn some dance moves. They can learn that from the internet and then practice it. They want to learn how to build something. They can go online, look at it, watch it, and then go build it. That's very constructive. That's a low dopamine activity, and it's a pleasurable one. Socializing online, let's say through Zooming, that's a perfectly good use of the internet, or educational. So those are all low dopamine activities that don't put them at risk, or at least not as at greater risk for addiction as high dopamine activities do. So these are some technology guidelines. These were created pre-COVID. So as you will see, they're very strict guidelines, but they're still useful because they pretty much guarantee that if you can follow these guidelines and teach your kids to follow these guidelines, it will require your supervision, of course. The screens are not going to interfere with their healthy development. Now, of course, in the time of COVID, all kids are using screens for school and socializing, and they just are spending much more time. But when finally kids start going back to school and being able to play with their friends and life starts returning to normal, I suggest that you come back to these guidelines and let them help you understand how to work with them. So here are some suggested rules, and I've got 3 minutes to go over them. and these are rules for you as adults as well as rules for kids. And number 1 rule, don't have screens in the bedrooms. No, no, no. No screens in the bedrooms. Let the bedroom be a place to relax without screens, sleep, and maybe a kid's bedroom will have toys and other activities, but no screens, please, if at all possible. And have certain areas of the home that are screen-free and certain times that are screen-free. You know, as an example, dinner time. Have a rule. Everybody's going to put their phones away, turned off, so that nobody has to be distracted while they have dinner. And that will definitely increase the chances of a good conversation at the dinner table. All right. So places and times without screens. I've already talked about non-academic screen time. Should be social or creative or educational. Those are all the low dopamine activities. For the most part, they're going to be low dopamine activities, but still very satisfying. Take a break every half hour, if you possibly can, to allow your eyes to rest and for the brain to go into what's called daydreaming mode. And the brain uses huge amounts of energy, and it uses up that energy. So when you go into daydreaming mode, it is restoring glucose to the cells to be used in your thinking processes. So take breaks to rest the eyes, to let the brain rejuvenate. And multitasking, folks, is not a good idea. There's tons of research that shows that multitasking, actually, however many tasks you're doing when you're multitasking, they are all degraded. Much better to unitask. Every task you do when you unitask, you will do better than when you're multitasking. Now, the irony is that people delude themselves into thinking they're being even more productive. They're doing everything better when they're multitasking, but it's an illusion. Unitasking actually is the way to get the best work done. It is advisable for parents to have access to all the devices and to be able to do checks on social media, gaming, and so forth. And this, is if you start this too late, kids will outsmart you. But if you start this early, then kids will actually just accept it as a part of life and that you're supervising what they do, and it'll be okay. So start early if you possibly can. And then weekly family meetings to review the rules and how things are going and make adjustments and let the kids participate in that so that they have buy-in. And I think I'm exactly at time.
You are, and the suggested rules, I'm going like, I have some work to do. There's a few of them that I'm like, I mean, I've got eye drops right here because, screen time, my eyes dry out. So there's a lot. So thank you. This was so informative and so helpful. And so again, you can reach out to Hilarie. It's on the slides. If you didn't get the slides, they're above Hilarie in the blue bar and you can download them. But her program is called Restart. And if you or someone you love is struggling in a deeper way, please reach out to her. They have a good program that can really help. So thank you, and thank all of you. We're going to be back on April 17th for the next Supersetter Day Recovery Summit. If you missed any of the videos from today, they'll be posted within the next week or so. So watch for them on the In the Rooms platform. As always, I'm grateful to In the Rooms and Seeking Integrity for the collaborative effort to bring these great presentations to the recovering community. So I'll see everybody in April. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.